It's great to be back in Barcelona. So I have a talk that I would give to my MBA class, and this talk would take 3 hours to give in a lecture, and you are going to get it today in 30 minutes. So, buckle your seatbelts. You know what they say when you get on the airplane? Buckle your seatbelts. It's going to be a rough ride, but we're going to cover all the material, and we'll land safely. So, a little word of introduction. Joseph was very kind to introduce me as a professor at the university. I am an adjunct professor. What that means in the U.S. context is that I'm a professor of practice. So I'm not an academic researcher. I'm a practitioner. I'm a business person who spends his time at the university teaching what they know. I was in the industry for 20 years before I came to the university, and in industry I specialized in helping high potential startups. These types of things we hear about in Silicon Valley, but when I was starting in Silicon Valley, the companies were Apple, Genentech. These were the companies that we got to work with. It wasn't the Instagram and Facebooks of today. It was a different flavor of entrepreneurship. When I came to the university, it allowed me the opportunity, though, to also be a venture capitalist, because I could then invest as well as educate. And this is what I wanted to do. So that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years. I'm an angel investor in my own account. I'm a professional investor with Monitor Venture Partners, where I'm a managing general partner. And this is a very exciting way to experience Silicon Valley. So enough about me. This is the place that I come from. And it's a beautiful place, but the key thing is that this campanile, which is the center of my campus, looks globally. It looks through the Golden Gate Bridge to the world. Berkeley and the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, is not an inward-looking place. It's an outward-looking place, as you know. Now, the important part of my campus is here. This is the engineering school, physics, chemistry, natural sciences. It has a research budget of almost $1 billion a year. And on the hill, if you can see behind the campanile, is the National Research Lab, which has another research budget. So together, $1.7 billion a year of money spent directly on creating new knowledge. So it's a very exciting place to be. So a takeaway from this talk is that entrepreneurs are very important, and government's very important. And together they form a great partnership. You need entrepreneurs to help commercialize the science and technology that's often funded by governments. So this innovation comes from individuals, and those individuals on a college campus are often young students like these. They work with organizations like the Leicester Center for Entrepreneurship here at the Haas School of Business that I founded 20 years ago when I came to campus. And our slogan at the Haas School of Business is leading through innovation. So how does one innovate in the education of entrepreneurship? Something that's been well established for a long time. We look deeply at the question of what is innovation itself? And clearly innovation is not simply discovery. It's the intersection of discovery and application. And the wonderful thing about innovation is that it is the tool of entrepreneurs. Innovation is essentially change managed to create value. And that is what entrepreneurs do. Entrepreneurs need change. If there is no change, the entrepreneur has no chance. Because let me tell you, those that have it don't want to give it up. In other words, the oligarchs, the big enterprises that own markets and have customers and serve them, are interested in incremental change that they can manage smoothly and enhance their businesses. Disruptive technology, the surprises that destabilize them, are the opportunity for entrepreneurs. And the great news is that the skill of taking advantage of disruption and creating new ventures, this entrepreneurial skill, can be learned. It's not inbred. It's not born into people. It's something you can learn how to do. And that's why it makes it important to teach it at the university. This curve represents the essence of the opportunity. It has all sorts of dimensions, especially here. The slope of the curve is almost nil. In other words, it takes a lot of time, effort, or investment to get any increase in productivity. That's what we call research. That is not the domain of the entrepreneur. The domain of the entrepreneur is when that research starts to be applicable to solve real problems. And when that happens, we get this increasing efficiency, increasing scale, where we really take off. That's when big businesses begin to notice us. And that's an important factor, because it also gives the opportunity for the entrepreneur to become part of big businesses, either by being acquired or by going public and becoming a big business themselves. So this process of technology taking off and then maturing, and taking off and maturing, is something we've all lived through over the last 10, 20 years, over and over again. With the mini computer, the personal computer, now the internet, and now the internet emerging into the cloud, right? Where the internet is truly a service industry, and the combination of the internet with mobile, and Barcelona being so important in the emergence of the mobile industry. A huge opportunity for Barcelona to be the mobile capital of the world for the next decade. You have a head start in that. You're well aware, I'm sure, of your World Congress that's been so successful here for so long. It positions Barcelona immensely well, and it's a great opportunity for local entrepreneurs to engage in how the mobile world and the internet of everywhere converge and create opportunities. So this process has a role for all. The university, the research lab, the scientists, they start the process by creating new knowledge, a very inefficient and expensive effort. The entrepreneur, the gazelle, the quick-growing enterprise, the venture capitalist, they come in when this research begins to pay off, begins to see the application for creating new markets and new opportunities. And finally, the mature enterprises. They pay attention when the entrepreneur builds businesses of scale. And oftentimes they acquire those businesses, initially competing with them, and ultimately either succumbing to the change or partaking in the change that the entrepreneurs create. So your question first for yourself is, where do you sit in this process? Are you a knowledge creator, a business creator, or a business harvester? Which enterprise do you feel most comfortable in? Because the entrepreneurial challenge is always that conversion, that bridging the gap, that big leap from opportunity perception to value creation. And that is what we're going to talk about. That's where we have something new. So the process of identifying opportunity and acquiring resources, that's been the entrepreneur's challenge forever. And those key resources are always the same: money, people, technology. And combining those resources to bridge that gap, that's the entrepreneur's task. And when they do it in collaboration with others, in collaboration with simpáticos, people who understand the process, then they're building a community of innovation that helps all. And that's what's going on here in Barcelona. It's been going on at 22Act, it's been going on at Barcelona Activa, it's going on here on an ongoing basis. This important ecology of entrepreneurship. So when we look at the process of new venture creation, it always has the same 4 steps. The initial investigation, then the market penetration, where you really spend a lot of money, and ultimately the growth of a profitable business, and then the maturation of a stable enterprise. So the entrepreneur's task is to gather those resources and deploy them, and the only way you get the chance to do that is to be able to be a fortune teller, to vision the future into the present. And that's what's new. What's new is what's going on in this very initial phase. We've discovered a new way to define the processes of the very early startup. So what's new? One, focusing on the fact that not all startups are alike. You know, what we used to believe is generally there was one startup process, and that startups were generally the same. And now we've learned to focus and separate out the difference between lifestyle startups, where people live their passion, and they do what is something that they feel very compelled to do. Or the social entrepreneur, who's solving a social problem, and essentially focusing not principally on creating profit, although sometimes using the profit mechanism as a way to gather resources. And also the small business startup that represents most of what business is in the global economy. But these are, you know, where you're serving a known customer base with a known product. The exit is not that important in the small business space. It's not the focus. It's survival, it's growth, it's profitability. Exits happen. By an exit, I mean a sale of the business, the ability to harvest your investment and get a multiple return. But there are different startups where the exit is a principal focus. The highly scalable startup. This is a picture of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak with the first Apple II, right? And this is, you know, the ultimate example of the scalable startup. And the objective here is to become a very large company. The goal is to attract what is at this point an unknown customer, and this is key. In a highly scalable startup, we're trying to solve a problem that is not understood to exist. Xerox had the Apple IIe, they had the Mac, as a matter of fact, the technology for the Mac. But they didn't commercialize it, because they didn't see the need. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak perceived the need for a personal computer, not just a small computer, not just a small business computer. Now this story is well known, but it's that perception before the world recognizes that indeed there's a market, that indeed there's a customer. So you're solving a problem where the solution is not known. Who the customer is, who the market is, what the pricing is not known. So in this scalable startup, you're born to be big. Your job is to discover the business model, and that's the criteria for the exit. That you've discovered how to make money. And that you're approaching a large, available, and growing market. That can grow, you know, and the enterprise can grow to something of scale, say $100 million a year. So, you take that to the extreme, then there's the viable startup. The startup that's really ready to be bought. And Instagram is the poster child for this type of startup. You know, where the objective from day one is to fit a niche that others will find highly attractive and to sell to a larger company. So, in summary, for this first step of what's new is to really recognize that these startups are different. And then to look at the processes to aid them that are appropriate for their goals. One of the discoveries, however, is that when we look deeply, many of these processes are the same. So, step 2, what's new? What's new is the perception that the startup is not simply a small version of a big company. Literally, for many years, at the lecture podium, at the High School of Business, I would say startups are simply big companies that happen to be small. That they have the same goals as big companies, the same objectives as big companies. Their goal is to become that big company. They just happen to be 2 or 3 people at the moment. And I thought I was conveying great truth when I said that. I no longer say that. You'll see in a moment why. Because we've decided and discovered that the job of the startup is not to execute, it's to search. And search for what? That's what we're going to talk about. It's the search process versus the execution process. So in strategy, we used to believe that you start with a business plan. And a business plan had two elements. Sort of a market description, an operational plan, and a financial model. We spent a lot of time on that financial model. So from roughly 1980 to 2010, literally 30 years of my life, I spent building and executing early stage business plans. Well, here's an actual photo of what happened when my plans had first contact with real customers. I mean, this is a dramatization, but it's literally true. No business plan survives first contact with real customers. It's a fiction. It's your best guess. It's an attempt, but it's a novel. It's a work of fiction. So what is realistic in this business plan process? What we used to believe is all we needed was this 5-year financial plan. And what would change is simply what you had to do by year 5. In 1980, when I was starting, you had to have $50 million in revenue by year 5. Now it got up to, you had to have $100 million in revenue in year 5. But we've learned now that this financial forecast, again, is a total work of fiction. So what we know now is that only venture capitalists and the Soviet Union were people that actually believed in 5-year plans. So we discovered not necessarily how to have startups succeed. I mean, if we had that magic, I could sprinkle fairy dust and we'd all be billionaires. But what we have discovered, it's very important, is how to help startups fail less. We all know that most startups fail, but we can reduce the failure rate and we can reduce the cost to the entrepreneurs and the investors in time and money in what it takes to decide whether you have a success or a failure. How? Is this all there is, the business plan? The insight was that there had to be something before the business plan, a search phase. But how should we structure that search phase? We understood that large companies focus on executing known business models. So clearly a startup had to be doing something else. And a big insight that evolved in a discussion between me and my colleague Steve Blank was that this startup, if they have such a high failure rate, is intrinsically a temporary entity. It's a temporary stage. And you come out of that stage either with discovery of a successful business model, or you fail and you shut it down. But it's a temporary period of time. And if you treat it as a known experiment, you're way ahead of the game. You're designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. So startups fail because they confuse search with execution. Startups need their own tools that are different from those used in existing companies. So in summary, the insights of part 2 of the process is that startups need unique tools to search. So what are the tools? The business model. If we understand that what we're looking for is a repeatable and scalable business model, let's focus on that versus the projection. Now, the leading work in terms of giving us a workable tool to understand a business model is this diagram behind me, which is a business model put together by Alex Osterwalder of Zurich. And he did a great job sort of imaging this process. Now, this isn't necessarily the only way to image a business model, but it's one Steve and I use on a regular basis because we find having a regular tool that's always used in every situation we look at, we can begin to recognize patterns. And pattern recognition is really the key process in understanding a startup. So this business model is a way a business creates value for all its stakeholders. So in strategy, the first step is to recognize that what you're going to do first is search for a repeatable business model and then execute. So this canvas is a way of capturing your model. Again, though, any business model is going to be a guess. It's going to be a set of guesses. And in scientific terms, we call those guesses hypotheses. And since one of the major places we use this business model is working with engineers and scientists, we like to use scientific language and say we use the scientific method by articulating hypotheses and then designing tests to test the hypotheses. So that's the job of the startup. And the way we test the hypotheses is really interesting. We go talk to the customer. What an idea. We don't talk to each other, and we don't go to the lab, we go to the world. In the process that we use, we insist our students have 100 face-to-face interviews. These aren't market research surveys, these are in-depth, 1-hour discussions with people trying to understand their needs so we can understand what value proposition they will act on to actually buy a product or service from us. So it's engaging with the real world is the experiment to test your hypothesis. This process Steve has written about, and it's called the customer discovery process. And it has 4 stages. I'm not going to go into them in detail, but each stage has a test point that's indicated by the stop sign here. And when you go around the process, you get to the test, and you say, have I proven my hypothesis? Am I prepared to proceed? And if you're not, you change direction, you develop new hypotheses, and you test again. Hypothesis, design an experiment, test, learn, get those insights, develop new hypotheses. So it's this process of learning. When we select teams for our course, we select them on their capability to learn. We have a course in which we can have 12 teams. This is the MBA program at the High School of Business, and we have 100 teams apply for those 12 slots. And you might think we would select for the best businesses, right? Because we would want to graduate the most likely teams to actually go into business and succeed. That is not the criteria we use. We select for teams that are the best learning engines, where the students have an appetite to learn. If the students come in with fixed mindsets about what is true, they don't qualify for the course. They should just go start their business. They should bypass the course and go do what they believe. But if you're truly recognizing that the startup phase is an inquiry process, a learning process, then we want you in the course, and those are the kind of entrepreneurs I want to invest in as a venture capitalist. Because you have to be prepared to change direction. We call that change in direction the pivot. So the process of search is one of learning, and then coupled with product development, you can move into execution once you've learned how to discover your business model and test your ability to scale that. So that's not bad. But what about product development? That's just about business model development. You have to actually implement. So what about product development and introduction? So we've all known how to do that, right? You take a concept, you put it through alpha test, beta test, etc. You build a marketing plan, you build a sales plan, you build a business development process, you build an engineering process. Whoops, no. You see the problem. You start all those dollars, you start all those people marching to a tune, they're headed off a cliff like lemons. Right? There's no flexibility built into that system. This whole process of waterfall development or engineering development, assumes that you know the customer problem. It assumes you know the product features that you have to deliver. Well, you don't even know what the value proposition is. So What we do is develop a minimum viable product. In other words, just a concept of what that product is, and then you might say it's not ready for the marketplace. It's barely a product. It might even be a cardboard box. It might just be a wire diagram. It might just be a picture. It might just be a description. But we take that description to the marketplace. And we test it, and we test it. And we don't test it by saying, here, would you buy this? We test it by asking people, what are their problems? What are their needs? Oh, would this tend to solve their problem? What would they change about it? How would it help them? How would they use it? What might they pay for it? What quantity would they order it? How often would they need it? Would they want it on a recurring basis, or would they want it on a service basis? Would they want it guaranteed? What kind of warranty would they expect? A minimum of 100 face-to-face interviews in 10 weeks. So, coupling that process with agile development, where you have these weekly resets of the agenda on what the priorities are, well, that's a better step. So you take the business model discovery, you match it to the customer development process, you match it with agile engineering, and you have an even better process. Looks pretty good. So what about the organization of the enterprise? What we used to believe was that enterprises have a functional shape. You have a CEO, and you have a VP marketing, and a VP sales, and a VP engineering. And pretty soon you have an organization, whoops, that doesn't look very flexible, right? So what we've discovered is the way to deal with this, and the reason to separate out search from execution is that the search process is something that's done by the founders. The search process is something that's done by the founders. The CEO doesn't hire somebody and delegate it. The founding team needs to together. The engineer doesn't stay back in the shop and work at the bench. They go out and meet the potential customer. The team needs to work as equals and engage in that customer discovery process so they can learn together. Shorthand develops, common understanding develops, agility develops. There's no sales, marketing, or business development activity by any individual with that responsibility. It's done by the team. So now we have strategy using the business model canvas to develop hypotheses and test them. We have a process to do that, discovery. We have an agile organization. So in summary, 3 tools: business model, customer development, agile engineering. The implications: lower initial investment, developing a minimum viable product rather than a full feature set, earlier testing and validation, more capital preserved and a higher valuation achieved earlier so that the entrepreneurs aren't overly diluted unnecessarily. Scaling financing becomes more available. You're more credible when you're going out and seeking truly institutional financing for an idea. It clarifies the role of the entrepreneur. The founding team understands its mission. Its mission isn't to execute, it's to discover. If it's going to execute, it needs to morph or change into a different type of organization. In the end, you achieve a higher rate of return for all, the entrepreneurs, the investors, the employees. So then the challenge comes to me in the classroom. Can we teach this? Because really, what have I said? I said, get out of the classroom, go talk to the marketplace. Is that a case study? Is that a final exam? How do you teach this? So what we used to believe was that education in entrepreneurship was about teaching execution. What we used to believe was that this curve was a continuum, that business development was the process. And now we know that that's too rigid. That it's really discovery and execution, that the discovery phase is one of guess and test, that the business model canvas and customer development are the key tools, that the search process is what we want to teach, and the search process maps against the old understanding, but gives new meaning to that process of value creation. So the business plan is still relevant, but that's when you manage execution. The business model canvas is a new tool to manage the search. The process is customer discovery. So these two tools together integrate over time to give us the tools we need. The key text for the canvas is Alex Osterwalder. The key text for the discovery is Steve Blank. So how did this evolve, in summary? It started about 10 years ago when Steve Blank walked into my office at UC Berkeley. He was a successful entrepreneur. He was known to me by reputation, and in fact, I'd met him several times before, in the height of his successes and in some of the depths of his failures. He had both. He had built billion-dollar enterprises as well as lost hundreds of millions of dollars for investment. Just the kind of guy I wanted in the classroom. But he wanted to teach this thing that he hadn't articulated yet. This thing he didn't even have a word for. This business process of inquiry. And I said, okay, well, one way to learn how to articulate this is to put you in front of a bunch of students and have you explain it to them. So for several years, we experimented with a class, customer development. It became very popular, one of the most popular in the hospital of business. And then Steve gathered his class notes and published a book. And it's in quotes because it's a very rough manual. It's literally his class notes. Then we developed another class and we exported it to our neighbor Stanford, to the engineering school. And Steve turned that into another book, the Startup Owner's Manual. And currently this is the best resource to understand the actual methodology I'm describing today. Then we turned that into another class, and this one is unique. It's called the I-Corps. It's funded by the National Science Foundation, where the National Science Foundation brings their best scientists in teams of 3 to a classroom, and we teach them this process, and we put them through this boot camp, if you will, for 10 weeks. Well, this experiment of a class has now blossomed and has become institutionalized over many campuses in the United States. We have nodes, if you will, at 5 geographic nodes embracing 12 universities, leading engineering schools throughout the United States, hundreds of teams. At the MBA level and at the graduate engineering level, there are also more schools where the process is being taught by the original team, Steve, myself, and others of our colleagues. Some are just 5-day versions, and some are full semester versions. Now we're experimenting with putting it online, and you can go to Udacity and hear the lectures. It's not the process of doing customer discovery, but the actual class lectures are available for free. And we've had over 60,000 students. And that's enabled us to free up more class time, actually have what we call a flipped classroom, where the content delivery, the lecture, is online, and we don't waste any class time with that. And all our class time is feedback from the students. And this is now scaled to an educator's class where 4 times a year, Steve and I teach this process to international audiences of faculty, generally about 90 to 100 faculty come together 4 times a year, and we educate them on the process. And what we teach them is the entrepreneurial API. And if you're a software developer, you understand that an API is how you design a handshake between the operating system and the application software. So what's this handshake between the entrepreneurial team and the marketplace? And the entrepreneurial API, as you can guess, is 3 parts: the business model, customer discovery, and agile development. So this is how entrepreneurship education, and in fact the process of starting startups, has evolved and changed in Silicon Valley and is now changing throughout the United States. And I dare say, emerging to affect the way processes are done throughout the world. And this is leading through innovation in the startup process. The key, though, to leave you with is that it always takes the individual, and that's you sitting in the audience, the individual entrepreneur, to take action. All these processes, all these methodologies are worthless without the individual stepping forward, and that individual is always engaged with others in a collaborative team process. No one does it alone. So entrepreneurship is a team sport, and we wish you all the very best success in this competitive endeavor, because it's not a zero-sum game. We all can win. Thank you very much.